Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Performance Engineering in a Center of Excellence. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Vivint Performance Engineering Special Interest Group. My name is Paul Chauvelin. I'm your host today. Chris Tremper will be helping with our polls and questions. I'm Director of Client Management with Checkpoint Technologies. I've been a long-time Florida Vivint chapter leader. I have 20 years experience in software quality assurance, and I'm currently leading an independent performance testing team at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Chris Tremper is an enterprise QA senior automation analyst at Independent Health. He is a Western New York Vivint chapter leader. He has over 10 years experience in software quality assurance, and he manages a team of 5 QA engineers. And here are our panelists today. We have Todd DeCappa, who's a champion for our Vivint Worldwide Performance Engineering SIG. And he is a previous leader of the Delaware and Philadelphia local chapters. And he's also leader of DevOps, Agile, and mobile SIGs with Vivint Worldwide. So Todd donates a lot of his time to Vivint, and we thank him for that. Petar Puskarich, hopefully I didn't butcher your name, Petar.
You got it.
Petar, what's that?
You got it correct.
All right. So Petar is an all-around technology and performance expert. Prior performance engineering leader of the Testing Center of Excellence at one of the largest North American insurance companies. So we're looking forward to your input today, Petar. And he's now at NTT Innovation Institute. We also have Wilson Marr. Wilson Marr is a developer who specializes in tuning for performance and availability of enterprise software. He was one of the first users and bloggers on LoadRunner, which led to him being a developer advocate at HPE. I'm sure many of you have probably even used his website, wilsonmarr.com, for reference as you run into challenges. His current work is on code generation and predictive data science that he is sharing with other companies. And lastly, we have Caleb Billingsley. Caleb is an executive at Oracy Software, where he runs the professional services focused around quality management, performance testing, and test data management. He has over 20 years of industry experience. His background includes developing custom software integration packages, automation frameworks, and cloud solutions. He is a natural problem solver and able to look at complex problem situations and lead teams to determine optimal solutions. So we thank you all, our panelists, for being here today and sharing your valuable time and expertise with us today. So our Performance Special Interest Group, we have monthly meetings. We meet the second Tuesday of every month of this year. Here's a link to our opening blog and links to our first 3 webinar blogs where you may get the slide decks, video replays, and polling results. And we also have our 9 remaining webinars for the rest of the calendar year, including today. And the links, the slide decks, video replay will all be up on the Vivint site. At the bottom of the slide, we have a link for speaker survey. We're always looking for speakers, panelists, and it's never too early to sign up. It helps us plan these webinars ahead of time. So please take a minute to complete our call for speakers survey to help better serve our Vivint performance engineering community and to share your expertise. We will be sending this survey link to all our SIG members. Some housekeeping items, and moving a little quickly because I really want to get to the meat of what we're presenting today. But Today's live session is intended for all Vivint members. The recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivint website, visible for all members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you. We will send you the link via email once they are posted to the Vivint website. If you have questions as we go along, please type and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. So here's the webinar control panel. This usually will appear in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded, and type your question and click on send. And we'll be going over questions at the end today. All right, so let's move on to our agenda. What is performance engineering in a center of excellence? Proven practices observed when transforming to a performance engineering testing center of excellence. Why transform from a performance testing center of excellence to a performance engineering testing center of excellence? How does a performance engineering testing center of excellence help your organization? Who in your organization decides on adopting performance engineering into your center of excellence? All right, so we're going to start off with a poll. Does your organization use performance testing center of excellence approach? We emphasize testing here because most organizations have yet to move to performance engineering testing center of excellence. So we want to gauge how much of our audience currently has a performance testing center of excellence. And we'll go ahead and wait for those results. Yeah.
All right, Paul, thank you. Results are coming in. We'll give them another couple seconds to vote in. Got about 2/3 of the people that are voting. Getting a good mix. I think you're going to find this to show that this presentation is very favorable to everyone's needs.
Thank you, Chris. And while we wait on those, I should note that I forgot to do any tongue twister exercises last night in preparation for having to say Performance Engineering Center of Excellence so many times on the agenda slide. I was never good at tongue twisters anyway.
Well, it looks like we got 3/4 of the folks voting, and I think most people are through voting. So let's close this poll and see how things are looking. So we have about 50% that have said yes, they use some form of COE approach. Another 40% that say they do not, and then the final 10% that are not sure. So really it looks like we got a good 50-50 of those that use it or either do not or aren't quite sure about it.
Okay.
So we can help enhance those knowledge of folks that do use it, maybe help them advance it and grow it, and definitely provide some insight for those individuals that don't or aren't quite sure if they're using it yet.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, this is Wilson here. I'd like to add to the group here that don't wait for the organization upstairs, to create these excellence centers. Go ahead and be a leader. Talk to the people, hold lunch and learns, and just talk about it. Among other people, even informally. So that's my 2 cents, my encouragement.
Great, thank you, Wilson. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Pitar to kick off the discussion on this. Pitar, what do you think about the results of this of our polling question of 50% yes?
Well, it's encouraging. I'd say, especially from my recent change in basically a near industry over the last 7-8 months. And I came out of a very strong organization that had a performance engineering testing center of excellence that I was the senior member of. And we built it from scratch back in like 97 all the way up to 2014 or so. But unfortunately, for that particular group, it's kind of imploding, and it was due to downturn in economy and the vision of upper management. And right now, that particular group is hanging on, just by the skin of its teeth, unfortunately. And in my new particular position, I would say it's going to be that 50-50. In the little group that I'm in now, I would actually technically say, no, we're not using it yet. because it's not at a critical mass for the products we're working on, and where the designs are, I guess, where the designs are coming from, because it's more of a Superman effort at this point, just because the engineering groups are 2 or 3 people wide. When you get into the more enterprise side of NTT, then internally to those groups, they do have centers of excellences, but I'm still learning my way around those particular organizations and trying to get access to some of that information. So yeah, even from my own experience here, it's a yes and no and maybe not sure. So I'd say, yeah, it's pretty indicative of what I've seen in the industry as well, especially out here in the Silicon Valley area, where I've had a couple interviews based off our design thinking methodology that we're using, where we interview different groups and organizations, see what their pain points are. And if you're a startup in the Valley, it pretty much is what they're looking for. I've heard the term the purple unicorn a lot when it comes to looking at, especially for performance aspects, performance tuning, advanced architecture kind of design decisions coming out of a person. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that person to make the actual effort on those projects instead of a group. Personally, I'm more in favor of the center of excellence approach, where you have the concentration of the methodologies, the best practices, the tooling, and the overall experience, so then you can actually mentor out to the groups that need them. But that's just my view.
Okay, great. Thank you for your input, Petar. And before we allow the others to jump in, I would like to note that my 7-year-old daughter has a purple unicorn, so I can take a picture of that and maybe provide it to everybody. We'll include it in the slide deck somewhere. So, hey, does anyone else have any comments on the results of the polling question?
I guess, Paul, the only thing this is Todd speaking. The only thing that I would add is I think the intent for the polling question is to really understand who our audience is and maybe where you guys are right now. And I guess, and I don't know, Petar, Wilson, Caleb, if you guys have the same thoughts, but I don't think whether you have a performance testing center of excellence or not means you're doing well or you're not doing well. As I think as you articulated well, Petar, that it really depends on your organization and where you might be right now. And part of what I heard you starting to describe is almost as many of the people that I work with in the field, with our existing customers, et cetera, is almost kind of a hybrid model where you do have a center of excellence presence, but then you also have talent and skills out in the business units as well. So kind of a lot in that comment, Paul, but I thought it was important to kind of add that in as we keep going here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Todd. All right. I'll go ahead and move along to the next slide. So when we came up with this topic, I decided to do some poking around, and I actually went to Wikipedia just out of curiosity what definition they have for performance engineering as well as center of excellence. Back in January for our SIG webinar, each of us, the leaders, gave our definitions of performance engineering. And when I took a look at these, and I thought, well, that this isn't too shabby. If you combine these together, sounds pretty good to me. So I just want to ask the panelists, start with Caleb. What do you think of this definition if you were to combine performance engineering and center of excellence? What do you think of this, and what's missing?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think I love Wikipedia, right? But it's definitely a mouthful, when you kind of read this out loud, these two definitions. But I think in a nutshell, what I see in a lot of organizations that we've worked with is project teams come at you a lot of times in a lot of companies at the very end of a project. Maybe the project is 2 weeks, 3 weeks away from meeting the final performance checkoff, and it's kind of this almost like you're an actuary where the business wants to know the risk. They've already built the system, they've already engineered it, they've already put everything together, and now they want your rubber stamp, or perhaps to find some fatal flaw that they can miraculously fix, with Superman powers in the last 24 hours before go live. And although I think a performance testing center of excellence, the goal is to be able to handle that request in the best way possible, right, and to give the best risk analysis and to find the most flaws you can in that short time frame. What really interested me in this topic, and participating in the panelist group, is this concept of a transformation to where you are more of an engineering focus and you have side-by-side relationships with architecture, with systems people, with the business, and where you're really trying to play a much broader role as almost an advocate or an internal consultant around total performance, from kind of start of a project all the way to the end of it. And really, I don't see this very often. I mean, probably fewer than 10% of the companies have achieved this, and there's a lot of reasons that you can see that. So, I mean, I'll just kind of pause there. I'm sure there'll be a lot of input from other panelists, but to me, that's really, we kind of hinted at it, with the topics in the first poll, but we're really drawing a line in the sand here saying performance engineering is much more than just having a great performance testing practice, which does add a lot of value to any organization. It's that step above where you're involved in a much broader, amount of time.
Yeah, Caleb, I couldn't agree more, and I guess what I would just add is it's, really how do you build in performance from the beginning? So thinking about it at that early stage engineering perspective, and it applies across everything. Could be custom software you're creating or commercial off-the-shelf software. It doesn't matter. Or, even in the car analogies that we all use, how is it that, again, from a performance testing to that transformation to performance engineering, how do you build that in across not only the technology teams, also the business, all focusing on that end user?
Well, from my perspective, it's definitely a challenge, right? And I think one of the things that probably sparked a lot of conversation would be, where should this team report, right? And oftentimes performance testing starts out in a QA organization, which could be the right place, but I see the few times I've seen true performance engineering, a lot of times it's actually linked in with the architecture team, or with where you have a kind of a DevOps model and you have somebody over everything. It seems to fit in nicely there too. So it seems like sometimes the teams that were established don't have quite the skill set range needed to really pull this off. And so that's one aspect, right? Is how do you feel comfortable looking at how do I expand the team skill set? And I know Wilson, and I've worked with Wilson a lot, and I know, Wilson, you've seen this, right, too, and you've got a much broader skill set than probably the typical performance engineer, which I don't think is definitely a bad thing at all, right? I think you have to look at where you're trying to take this team vision-wise, but I think that can be a challenge, is the makeup of the team, the vision, and kind of how do you position it if you really want to go down this performance engineering road.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's I started out as a developer and got into performance because I thought it was a harder thing to do than just slinging code around. And then I got stuck in the QA organization, and ever since then, people almost automatically think that I don't have any technical skills for some reason. But one thing I wanted to mention with this Wikipedia thing, that's what I see is glaringly missing, is that it's very much of a technical viewpoint on here in terms of measuring latency and memory. I think in today's world, what people are looking for is money, right? Show me the money. And what we need to do, I think, is evangelize, among even the functional, the feature developers, and even the financial people, and say, look, if you're in the cloud, I can tell you whether using 3 small machines is more cost effective than 1 large one. That's a big decision very few people even consider. And so basically, you got to all boil it down to money. And Qatar has been, great at figuring all that out in terms of, how to translate all this activity into, money.
Yeah, and thanks, Wilson. And to go along with what you're saying there too, it's also, I guess, over the years, hard to also find that talent that has the breadth across a lot of these topics. in order to handle system-wide design, to look down within OS parameters, exactly that, to figure out, do you scale horizontally, vertically, or do you actually just streamline it down to a single CPU processor with a given amount of RAM, and that actually becomes the most beneficial. And not necessarily just because you're testing it, but because you know the architecture inside and out and all the different parameters that make up that decision. And at least that's one of the things that I ran across over the years as well. One of the other things I wanted to add in on this was also that within this definition, I think one of the things I've seen missing a lot of them is that when you go from performance testing center of excellences into performance engineering, kind of like the difference I give is it's like performance testing is more around the how is the problem being instantiated, what is the problem in your system. But when you get into the performance engineering side of it, it's finding out and knowing the why and how do you mitigate that problem. And then it all comes back down to it's money. If your system goes down, it's costing money. Sometimes physically, sometimes in brand erosion. So it's important to keep those outages at a minimum.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to share with everybody a definition from our January SIG meeting that Chris Tremper, one of our SIG leaders who's also handling the polls and questions today, provided. And I just really liked this definition for performance engineering, wanted to share it with everybody. And what I like is that it keeps it simple. And each organization is going to have a slightly unique definition of what performance engineering in a center of excellence means to them. But the point is here is that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be something that you can keep simple. So we're going to go ahead and move along to our second polling question. Is your organization seeking to adopt performance engineering practices with the goal to become a performance engineering testing center of excellence? And we have yes, no, not sure.
Hey, Paul, for me, I think this kind of summarizes the whole dialogue that Wilson and Pitar and Caleb were just having is, really focusing on, the value of performance engineering and thinking about this from an organizational perspective. And Wilson nailed it into, how do you bring it back to that conversation? Is it about revenue? Is it about competitive advantage? Is it about, reducing the costs associated across the business? Is it your time to market and that competitive advantage piece? Or is it really looking at your customers and from an acquisition and a retention perspective? So I think there's a lot of reasons why organizations do this, but again, I'll hand it back over to you, Paul. I think this is a great polling question, and I'm sure we'll have a nice conversation following it as well.
Great, thank you, Todd. And we have some other polling questions later that we're going to see those points come to light.
All right, so let's go ahead and close this poll because we got about another 3/4 response. So that's pretty good. So out of our responses for seeking to adopt a performance engineering practice with a goal to be a PECOE, we have a little over half, 63%, that are saying yes. So there's quite a bit of demand for this. Only a small 17% say no, which could turn into a no, not now. And then 21% that aren't quite sure. And who knows, maybe at the end of this presentation, that not sure might turn into a higher yes with all the information that we're able to share.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you, Chris. I'll start off with Todd. Todd, what do you think of the results of this poll?
Well, 63% saying yes. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. So to me, that number seems substantially higher maybe than what I would have expected. And I think what many of us have been observing in the market. But again, like I said, it's a pleasant surprise. And the other one that's kind of funny for me and is the 21% coming in is not sure. So I'd be interested in having a coffee with someone to understand a little bit more about, they're not sure if they're seeking to do it. It seems like it's, maybe it is something that's still in flux and they're kind of that maybe right now. But those are just my thoughts. I don't know if anybody else on the panel, if you guys have any thoughts as well.
I think the thing that we need to...
Go ahead, Wilson.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry, Wilson. Sorry, go ahead, Wilson.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm very curious as well because it looks like this is a very nascent organization that we're working with, or the profession that we're working with. This thing didn't exist for more than 10 years. Really, that's for people to see, and that's still very very new to a lot of organizations. And I think the biggest impediment to this performance engineering isn't the technical aspect, but the political/organizational structure that people are trying to experiment with. Like Yahoo, for example, recently they just got rid of the whole QA organization, but they still had a good quality assurance that's being done by the developers and so forth. And so I see even in that situation, the COE is continuing on because that would provide the leadership, the training of the people, and so forth. So it doesn't have to be within QA, like Todd had mentioned before.
Wilson, I think that's a great point in that the market has kind of the explosion of the number of Agile projects. And Agile itself, what's 13, 14 years old, it's not necessarily new, but it definitely seems like there's been a recent growth. I saw a survey that basically talked about the number of companies that have at least one or more Agile projects, and it was in the high 80s, 80 percentile, which is really just shows you the penetration of that technique for developing software. And it seems like the ability to have something to test earlier and the benefit that's given the end users, there's still this demand for performance, and so you have something you can test earlier. So it's really created this kind of interesting scenario where engineering your solution, your product, to be able to be performance tested is very relevant, and being able to do that with every build is also very relevant. So it's, when you talk about performance engineering, right, that's that concept of building it into the product. And then the center of excellence, I think, is a thing that does concern me a little bit, because you see, like you said, Wilson, this whole QA organization is quote unquote let go, and then the developers are still supposedly maintaining this quality assurance level. And what we've seen is a lot of the testers get absorbed into the Agile teams, and they're contributing. But my question would be, are they all the same quality level across all the teams? I guess the argument would be, well, it should spit out, a failed test, right, at some point, or whether it's functional or performance at the tail end. But there's definitely a concern there, when you see companies doing that and kind of pushing it out into all the individual teams. Are they really keeping the same quality metric or center of excellence that you had with a centralized organization? And that really does seem to be a big trend.
I'd add in there that I'd say the quality level goes directly with the fact that if, I guess, the engineers embedded within the Agile teams are dash line back to the group of themselves, so kind of a virtual center of excellence, then I think there's a chance. Otherwise, the fear that we're talking about right now, I think actually becomes very real. And I've actually seen it at least 4 times in my career where that's exactly what happened. We'd have some engineers that were extremely talented at doing diagnostics, but really didn't know load runner. We had the reverse of that, where they were great for setting up the tests and actually saying, here's a problem we're having with a web service early on in that Agile cycle, but yet they couldn't figure out what was going on in the back-end Java systems. So it was kind of like hit or miss, and the quality of those dev lines showed that as well at the end. But then one thing in that process was there was still a waterfall toward the end, even after the Agile process was there, that went through regular, say, a PT run in the PT environment, and then a lot of those missing things came together, and then the other talent that we had that handled full flow would basically catch that. So it's kind of a safety valve there of some sort, but not all groups have that.
Well, I think that the COE does not have to be, you know, like a whole group of people sitting, you know, a chair around the round table or something. You know,
Right.
It could be. I've seen this in a couple of places. I've seen it where it would be COE could be as simple as a list of people and their skills, and that can basically go into a agile team, sit as a member of that agile team to get them started, and then they would move on to the next team and, you know, set up all this stuff. Because there's a huge amount of things to set up, you know, in terms of Jenkins and Git and all that. I mean, it's the infrastructure that's huge that needs to be set up, and there's a lot of things to learn. So I'm thinking that that might be actually a good setup, is where the COE would be like a you know, service offering, you know, just to have a list of people and you know, and timing in terms of when they're available, and that maybe that's all they need to do, and would offer huge support, you know, for these agile teams that need to be moving fast.
And used appropriately where they're needed instead of isolated with them.
Right, exactly. They have no idea, you know, that what's going on, and I think that, you know, a lot of these agile teams would appreciate the not wasting time on training individual people to do all these things, and have specialists come in and help out. You know, still part of the team, but, you know, have some background in those specific skills. And so the agility of the organization is really important. You know, so it's not just about the product getting produced, but also the agility of people moving around and offering their expertise.
I guess the only other piece I would want to add here is I did my first large agile transformation from 2006 to 2009, and it was a little bit of an experiment, and what we ended up doing was playing around with the different ratios of skill sets and team sizes and sprint lengths and everything else. With that, we also had to measure some pretty specific quality items, because I think, you know, like I'm hearing everybody talk about, you need to have some sort of way of measuring quality to see, you know, are we doing well or are we not doing well? So that became very quickly something that we called an information radiator, and there were really only two metrics that we looked at. But for the 43 Scrum teams that we had running concurrently, this information radiator was very visible to everyone. So if you started going down, again, it became very visible across the teams. But again, that was more of an embedded model that we ended up with, and it worked very well for that organization. I published that article in 2009, the results of this 3-year study. It is on isixsigma.com, and if you just look under my last name, DeCapua, you will see it there.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody. Great discussion. We're going to go ahead and move forward with the next polling question. Which factors are most important in transforming to a performance engineering testing center of excellence? Select all that apply, so you can select more than one here. I'm waiting for the Jeopardy music to start playing. We should do that. We should use Jeopardy music for the polls. What percentage we have coming in, Chris?
So we got about a third of them coming in. It does look like this poll was set up for a single selection, so let's slightly tweak this to everybody choosing what is the primary factor that they feel is the most important. And then we can allow you to kind of drive from there.
Okay, great. Thanks for catching that, Chris.
I'd also like to add, while people are finishing voting, that, you know, like any change, you know, it's not a cut and dry change that I think that people think about. there's an evolution to it, and we go from one step to the next. So for me with these webinars, I always look back at them and think, all right, we got this far. Let's revisit the webinar and see where we are 6 months from now, 12 months from now, and what's important to us next. Looks like we got about another 3/4 of the folks voting. So I think for the sake of time, let's close the poll and go over the results and allow us to have some feedback on that. So we had an overwhelming response for the culture of performance. I think that social aspect is very important. Another 25% say the building test through the life cycle, and then split at the last two 8%, both 8% to feedback from production to pre-production, and then feedback or communication to the stakeholders. So those are the last 8 and 8. And unfortunately, nobody mentioned anything about release automation with quality gates. So maybe it's just not quite ready for that yet. So.
No, in fact, I think that shows how experienced and smart I think our audience is. As this idea, I think, of quality gates has changed over time. It used to be that with the old, QA culture in the 70s and 80s, we've transformed from, a policeman giving, out traffic tickets kind of an approach to, this integration with the developers. So the way that they look at it, especially in these teams where they apply, red-green refactor techniques and, behavior-driven development and all those, techniques, is that you're building in quality and checking it all the way along rather than having a gate that we have. And then the scripts that are being used are accumulated over time, so that way they would be reapplied, at each of the different levels of integration tests and so forth. So I'm really impressed that everybody thought so as well. It seems.
I would say on the culture of performance, it's really interesting that got ranked at the top, which could mean one of two things, right? That everybody feels like the organization needs to grow in that area a little bit, and they don't respect it, or maybe perhaps they are seeing that change of the culture. And I know myself and my experiences with companies is it seems like I equate it really to the mobile revolution, that we're very impatient. I don't know anybody else on the phone, but when my phone is slow on my cell phone, I'm trying to do something on a mobile app, I get very frustrated to the point where I'll reboot my phone, kill every app. It's like I don't accept anything that's not blazingly fast, on my phone, to the point where I'll uninstall apps if I suspect they're being CPU hogs. And I think if anything's really made people aware of performance in a way that probably hasn't been there since computers were invented, is this concept that, hey, we don't have to wait to get something done. And there is a lot of business value and perception and prestige with a brand that's fast and speedy, and you can do things quickly. And it doesn't matter if you're on a mobile app entering in an insurance claim, or if you're out in the field, using an app to do your job. We see it everywhere now. I just went and visited the company this morning, and the first thing I had to do is go up to a mobile check-in app to register to go visit a client. And it sped up their process where they get literally probably hundreds of visitors a day. So it's this culture of performance. The good news, I think, is if your company's not there yet, I think that the groundswell is building to accept nothing less than fantastic performance. And maybe this is a little bit of a self-serving prophecy on my part, but it seems like that to me. I don't know if any other panelists have experienced this culture, or how you would read that response overwhelmingly from the audience.
So it is definitely a double-edged sword. Last Thursday I was at a very large financial institution in Reston, Virginia, and meeting with the individual who's responsible for transitioning their organization from a performance testing center of excellence to a performance engineering testing center of excellence. And when I mentioned culture of performance, it was interesting because he looked at me and he said, do you realize how big of a deal that is to do in an organization this size? And especially now that we're talking about not only impacting the technology organization, but also the business organization. So I do agree that it is probably the biggest factor and most important in transforming to a performance engineering testing COE. At the same time, I think that it can be rather overwhelming when you actually start thinking about the specifics. And then, Wilson, the only thing that I might add on the last one here, the release automation with quality gates, is as I'm interfacing with a lot of people on more mature DevOps types environments, they're providing me with, you're right, the quality gates of yesteryear where you had these entry and exit criteria that we've all loved to hate, has transformed now into being this automated set of scripts that not only sets up your environments, also runs, some of your early development tests where you could incorporate some performance engineering practices as well. But that's the piece that I'm just finding a lot of people, as they're maturing through DevOps, they're trying to figure out how all this release automation piece works as well. And there's a lot that's involved there. So again, that's, I think, where this fifth point was pointing to, is kind of that the next stage of what release automation with quality gates means.
Cool. And I just wanted to add in real quick before we went on, since this one's kind of like near and dear to my heart as far as the whole culture of performance engineering as well. One thing I've seen happen many times over my career is that when you start building that culture, it's not enough to have the grassroots engineering level and pushing up to make this happen. To make that transition, you have to have the top-down as well support, or you really go nowhere, or at least you start to fizzle after, I'd say, 2 years of trying to push through this process. But the encouragement on the side is you only need one person from top down that has influence that can actually affect the entire outcome of your performance team. Because once you have that top-down pressure, they're going to socialize out across their peers, and that opens up tons of doors across the business units, across the technical units, and then your engineers can actually have some breathing space and actually can do what they're good at. That's what I wanted to add there too. So you don't need to actually transform the whole organization overnight. You just need that one from the top to help.
Hey, great.
I would
great. Thanks.
Suggest. Yeah, I'm sorry. I would
Go ahead,
also
Will.
suggest.
Make it.
Thank you. Yeah, I will also suggest talking to the other support organizations. Like, for example, I went to the personnel department of HR who wrote up these job descriptions for developers and all these others, and asked them, hey, can you add testing to one of the things that the developers do? And they did that, and I think that has a major impact to me. The other one is working with the Scrum Masters and explaining to them what the benefits are, and I found some helpful, interaction with them as well, that they would guide the various teams as they went about their work.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to the next polling question. Why do you see performance engineering as important for your organization? Are listeners able to select more than one of the options, or are they limited to one?
Looks like we're limited to one here as well.
Okay. Okay. So
let's pick our biggest blocker.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is most important for your organization? And to touch back on what the previous discussion, culture of performance, that goes back to being an advocate. We discussed that in January SIG, and Wilson touched on that on the top of the meeting. You always need a champion and advocate for performance testing, for performance to be successful in every organization. Otherwise, you keep hearing jokes such as, what performance requirements?
I think this is a really important question too, especially as we're talking about transforming in that, oftentimes we try to start small, prove out the value, and then start to do more throughout an organization. So I think being able to identify within your organization what is most important will help you to start focusing on, okay, I need to be able to show or prove the value of this effort or activity that we're transforming to, and tie it all back to whatever the specific item is.
Good point.
All right.
Chris, go ahead.
It looks like we got our magic 3/4 polling results in again, so let's close the poll. So everyone says, why do you see performance engineering as important to your organization? 21% said revenue, 13% said brand value, another 21% said competitive advantage, and the last 46, the largest amount, say the customer acquisition and retention.
All right. Oh.
And I'm going to go along with everyone here about the apps and say I abandon apps so fast if they're not fast and good. So retention is huge in my mind as well.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to throw this one out to the wolves. Whoever wants to start off, go ahead and take it.
Well, the answer is really all of these, but the idea here, I think, is that you would have the highest performance for the amount of money that you spend. And so the question is really a risk management factor in terms of people devoting the amount of time, is how much is really their customer retention worth. And once they kind of analyze that a little bit more, they may decide and realize that its performance is more important than they had thought, and so as a result, they would put more money into it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it depends on the industry you're in. Obviously, retail, it's giving your customers. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add on the results of this polling question? If not, we'll go ahead and move on to number 5 so we can get some questions in.
I'd say really quick on my new point of view role here for NDT Innovation Institute is that, yeah, it's all of those, but I think the primary that we're looking at right now is that performance engineering being important for the fact that the solutions we're coming up for R&D for our partner companies, are they actually functional and actually working the way we want them to in order to solve a problem. So the emphasis that we're putting on our solutions basically is, what solution are we providing that was requested of us to solve? And as long as that happens in the design timely manner, we're good to go. And that carries out a lot of things. So yeah, that's where all your latency, your costs, your perceived value all flow into that all at the same time.
Thank you, Patar. All right, we'll go ahead, in the interest of time, go ahead and move on to the next polling question. Who in your organization, and this is an important question, who in your organization is responsible for making the decision of adopting performance engineering into your center of excellence? CIO, CTO, VP of operations, director, quality, business unit leaders. And lastly, good question, I have no idea.
I guess, Chris, it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading lately on this chief quality officer role. It seems to be something that's popping up more and more, but I think it's something that's still pretty new. I don't know, Chris, are you seeing that anywhere as well?
Not as an actual role. Maybe a person that has such near and dear tie to the company that they assume the role, but they're not actually doing it. But that person that's like trying to keep control of everything, but I have not actually seen it as a refined role. I think it'd be very interesting in hearing success stories from companies that have been defining that.
I've seen it less and less in organizations because, it's really, quality isn't something its own. I mean, they're not really responsible for anything. They don't, they may have a budget, but it's not, they don't own anything, in terms of the actual assets of the company, other than licenses to Performance Center or something.
All right. Chris, can we go ahead and close out the results?
Yeah, let's close this one out. We got just shy of 3/4. So who in the organization is responsible for making that decision for adopting a performance engineering into your COE? So 26% said your CIO, your CTO. 5% said the VP of Applications, 32% said the Director of Quality, or that newfound role of the Chief Quality Officer, 5% say the business leader units, and the final 32% said that's a great question, they don't know.
Great, thank you, Chris. So panelists, I'll ask you, who do you see as the person most responsible for making the decision to adopting performance engineering into a center of excellence? Anyone can start off. Todd, I know you have an opinion. Go ahead, you could kick it off.
Sure. So, I mean, the one thing straight away is it's interesting to see that tied for first is at 32%. It's a great question. I have no idea because, you know, I'm assuming that most of the people on the phone are at least in the quality space and probably in the performance space, and would hope that, you know, to learn kind of who that is that's responsible for making the decision, and maybe even the persons that are joining us would be an influencer to that. But it kind of comes back maybe to that question that we were just kicking around is, you know, at the end of the day, who is accountable for quality in production? Is there that single ringable neck anymore of, you know, when it does fail, you know, who does your CEO, your CIO, your CTO, who do they go to ask the question of why did it fail and how are you going to prevent that from happening again?
Right.
I think it's definitely kind of a tough, you know, it's a tough one, right? Because performance engineering by its nature spans all aspects of the application lifecycle, and as such, right, saying that the VP of, let's say, quality, chief quality officer would make more sense. You know, if you put it with that one person, right, they've got a lot of selling to do internally, and may not even have all the skills they need on their team to truly accomplish this vision. And so then you've got kind of a cross-collaborative nature, and then throw in Agile in the mix. And maybe this is one of the biggest challenges, you know, facing organizations that have some people at a grassroots level that want to see this achieved in their company. There's definitely companies out there we could point at, you know, large ones, right, that we use for search engines that, you know, from day one, right, quality and performance has been very top of their list. And, you know, clearly that's just their culture. You get hired on and everybody understands that's their culture, but it's a different scenario where now you've got a more, you know, kind of a company's been around, and now you're adopting mobile platforms, and these platforms that demand, your users are demanding this level of performance, whether it's a user out there checking a gas meter that's an employee, or whether it's a customer at an entertainment park that you're, you know, visiting. You demand this level of performance, and it's your brand, it's your customer retention, it's all those great things you brought out. And, you know, really probably is going to create the need for this chief quality officer, somebody that has some teeth in the organization that can spread across Agile teams. It can be kind of a politician as well as, you know, a little bit of an engineering side, and be able to interact with the business people and, you know, foster this vision along. Because if you don't, I don't see how you succeed in silo, you know, with a true performance engineering approach. I mean, it's definitely a multi-team, multidisciplined effort, you know, to accomplish these goals.
Great. Thank you, Cal. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? All right. So here are some helpful performance engineering community sites for reference. I'll give everyone a few seconds to write in case anyone's jotting them down. We'll remind everyone that these slides will be available on the Vivid site.
Yeah, I'm encourage the audience to put questions in if you have them, because I'm very curious. If, you know, when I volunteer to participate in this panelist, you don't realize how short an hour is until you start talking about some of these concepts and how fast it goes by.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You know, even if we don't get to answer them all on the call today, I'm sure Todd can incorporate them into the beacon and some of the other efforts that are underway that he manages. But I would love to see, you know, any and all questions. Take a moment, throw something in. You forgot about, you know, production feedback, right? Or there's a lot of things that we didn't get to cover today.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Just a quick reminder that we hold these webinars second Tuesday of every month, and the slides, recordings, and blogs will be available for each on the Vivid site. Please share this SIG with your colleagues as well. We're always looking to grow our special interest group. And we're also always looking for experts, speakers, panelists. It's never too early to sign up, so please take a minute to complete our call for surveys, speaker survey, to help better, serve your Vivid performance engineering community. And again, this will be going out to everybody, and please share with any of your colleagues who you think might be interested in our, not only our SIG, but also in speaking. Yep, it's that time of year. Discover 2016 is coming up already. It's only 3 months out. Early bird pricing ends by the end of March. The March 31st is the end of early bird pricing, where if you register for the conference, you will save $300. Before we get to the questions, I just want to say, sorry. Well, let's just go ahead and go right to questions. But I had another slide there, but so Chris, do we have any questions queued up there?
Yeah, we have some great questions. If we don't get a chance to get to all of them today, as mentioned, there will be a follow-up blog article for this webinar, and I'm sure we can add more of the answers in there as well, including some links to some great articles. So let's start one here. It asks, is there a suggested mix of people in terms of different types of experts a good performance engineering COE should have? And a couple examples are a mix of testers, developers, database experts, etc.
And with the questions, we're just going to throw them out to the panel. So if anyone wants to take it, go ahead and take it.
Well, this is something that I did. Again, I'll go back to the example where my first of 3 large Agile transformations. I mean, it's different for every organization. There's a lot of variables as to why. But what I found the most helpful, and what we found most helpful in that team, was to try playing around with different ratios. And again, it may be different depending on the platform that team is most working with, or is it net new technology versus legacy? Again, there's a lot of different scenarios, but my suggestion is, try it, measure it, and then, modify it as you need as you go.
Right. Thank you, Tom. Go ahead and move on to next question, Chris.
Okay, let me just find the next one for us. There's a couple folks that are asking for different links to resources, and I think for those, instead of just discussing them, we'll pull some of those links together and put them in the blog that's going to be published for this, so that everybody has an opportunity to get to those links. So here's one question from a attendee. What are some of the that's a repeat, sorry. How is HPE shifting to support performance engineering? So we're all part of Vivid. We use HPE software. How does it work for us?
Anybody want to take that?
Well, I guess
Thank you, Todd.
I guess as the guy who gets a paycheck from HPE, but I mean, in all sincerity, all of us have run together for a very long time. I've been a Mercury user since 1997, so again, coming up in this space, there is a lot that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is doing to support, whether you're a small, a medium, or a large organization around performance engineering. I guess I'm not going to sit here and go through everything, but if you go to hpe.com/software/PE, that will get you to a product page that starts to explain a lot of the capabilities that we're focusing on in supporting performance engineering.
Well, I'd like to also add that the way that a lot of companies are moving in today's world is towards a lot of open source type of tools, specifically the ELK stack or the Elasticsearch, Kibana, front-end GUI to Logstash, which collects the numbers. And there's a number of other cloud kind of platforms, that one of which is HP provides. So I would suggest that if you learn those, the nice thing about the open source is that you can download it, create a server and have those skills, so that way you can kind of work with it. And so, many companies are adopting that. But I think the key issue isn't so much about a particular vendor, but go to the production people and find out what they use. Is it the ELK stack? Is it Sumo Logic? Any number of those, and use those tools in your test environment. And that's really the key. Because when you do that, then you can figure out what the trigger levels are. You can help them with their trigger response. So a lot of companies, they have automatic triggers that occur if servers reach a certain level, and they have no way of testing it except for performance engineering people who could artificially add those loads. So again, look at production, replicate those, in your test environment, and these guys will thank you because it'll help them do their jobs better.
It also helps building that bridge from test into production when you go to do your APM. So then when there's problems out in production, you're viewed as a resource, not as a hindrance.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and take one more question and we'll wrap it up.
All right, I think I've picked out an interesting one for you. I'll summarize it for you. So in organizations that have implemented a performance engineering COE, how is the cost of this handled across the organization? That can be such a critical factor in pushing performance engineering throughout the organization or continuing to grow it. So we'll have to talk about the almighty dollar for a brief second.
Yeah, this is Caleb. I can say what we've seen doesn't work, which is kind of this fixation on 100% billable back to the projects, and just at a super high level, it makes a lot of sense why it either doesn't work or is very, very challenging, and that is you've got to maintain a COE. You look at the different aspects that it encompasses, and you've got to do some training, you've got to do some governance. There's some things that just don't really logically link back into an agile project or to a project in particular. And so when the company gets wholly fixated on rates and on 100% billable back to a single project, it gets really hard to have a COE, and I think that's a lot of the risks we outlined in this call overall. So I think that would be one of the big challenges I see facing organizations.
Well, let me take this opportunity to put in a plug for the systems I've been working with. It's basically generating JMeter and load runner scripts from API specs, specifically the Swagger spec. So what I've done there is go to the teams and say, okay, you've got a certain budget of time for your people to do this, benchmarking or micro benchmarking your system. Give me that time. What I'll do is, I'll generate that script for you, and the time savings that you have, I will spend that time educating the rest of the people. I will spend that time, creating the environment for you and that kind of stuff. And so I think that we need to kind of look at outside the box a little bit and think about code generation and other techniques to where you eliminate much of the delay and much of the manual actions. So that way you're focusing on innovation rather than just getting the scripts created.
Great. Thank you, Austin. And so, hey, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I'd like to thank our panelists for your time, expertise. It was a great discussion, and Chris as well. Thank you very much. Just a reminder that the webinar recording and slide deck will be posted to the Vivid website. You'll be receiving an email in the next couple days, day or two, with those links. And that's all I have. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month. Bye.